Hey guys, this is Rich Gaspari and another episode of Beyond the Muscle, and we're going to talk about peptides and performance. In this episode, the underground secrets of bodybuilding. I have my guest here, Andy Triggs. He's been on the show before, but this is really cool because here he is an expert in the subject of peptides. But give the audience a little bit about your 19 years of experience in what you do.
Well, Rich, thanks for having me here again. I surely appreciate the opportunity. And yes, I've had 19 years of experience in the anti-aging world. I'm currently the Vice President of Business Development for Renew Vitality, which is a nationwide testosterone and peptide clinic. I've also had a lot of experience in clinical laboratory, sterile and non-sterile compounding pharmacy, as well as research and development and marketing in the nutritional dietary supplement space. So I think there's a lot I have to offer, and I'm delighted to talk about peptides.
Oh, I'm very excited about this because, I myself use peptides. I know a little bit about peptides. I know that they're short chain, amino acids, but there's so many peptides that have come about, and I'm not even sure when it started. It's not that many years ago that this has all come about, but it's just amazing now, the research and more that are coming out that have such benefits and target certain benefits for your body.
Oh, for sure. There's a ton of different types of peptides. I mean, you have peptides that help to increase growth hormone. You have peptides that help with healing. You have peptides that help with skincare. You have peptides that help with cognitive function. You have peptides that deal with all kinds of different issues. There's peptides that even help you to tan your skin. So there's a ton of options.
Don't forget the one that helps you lose weight. Now, the biggest one is Ozempic, those semaglutides.
Well, most certainly. The GLPs are a huge deal. Those are probably the most popular peptide, or the most commonly used peptide, or the three different GLPs that are most popular, especially in the fat loss, longevity, wellness, regenerative medicine world, which are semaglutide, tirzepatide, and retatrutide. Occasionally, liraglutide is in the mix, but not as much. But they're game changers, not only for people who are looking to deal with their type 2 diabetes, but for fat loss, but also there is a place for these peptides potentially in physique competition.
So let's talk about some of the peptides available. I myself have used what's called the Wolverine peptide, used a combination of BPC 157 and TB 500. And listen, I'm older, I have, nagging aches in my knee, my shoulder, and honestly, it was a miracle supplement, or whatever you want to call it, a miracle peptide, because the inflammation went down, the healing of my knee was much better. I was able to, lift heavier again without a problem. I actually tore a little bit of my meniscus in my knee, and I used the peptide for about 6 weeks, totally healed. I could go back in the gym and I was able to train.
Rich, I've actually had a similar experience with the Wolverine protocol as well. I've taken the BPC actually for about the last 26 months, intermittently cycling on and off the TB 500. I had 2 partial tears in my right shoulder, 2 partial tears in my left shoulder, an issue with my patella tendon in my right knee, and I have had just profound recovery with that protocol. It's really unbelievable. One of the problems we've run across is that the FDA has now restricted and limited access to a lot of these peptides for everyday Americans, not even just athletes, but for people who would benefit from them. So I think there's a certain degree of controversy around their restriction, and I think that's something that we may want to talk about.
And the thing is that I've heard that too, that the FDA has restricted the usage of these peptides, and there has been no really contraindications like causing any type of bad side effects from taking them. And I believe, and we can say this in the room, that Big Pharma is there saying they want to make their cut and they want to make their money from this.
Well, I think that Big Pharma has a big influence on the FDA, and I think that all the folks in the world where I operate in the anti-aging, regenerative medicine, testosterone optimization space are super excited about the new administration, and especially RFK taking over Health and Human Services, because he's so pro-peptide, he's so pro-nutraceutical, pro-holistic approach to health, that we may see some profound changes in what happens in the regulatory environment. And what's allowed, and the flexibility in which people are given to be able to choose their own prescriptions.
What I love about us being in this fitness industry and health industry, here's a guy that trains every day, or at least 5 days a week. You see him in Gold's Gym training. The thing is what he believes in. He believes in preventive health. Going to the gym, training, eating properly. So although I believe that he's going to make big changes, I know that he's not totally for everyone taking Ozempic. It's almost like the easy way out. He wants more people to diet. Like they're giving Ozempic like it's like Pez candy, which I think is ridiculous. Someone that, has a problem with weight, instead of teaching them to eat properly or train, boom, they go on fucking, excuse my language, they go on, Ozempic or Manjaro or any one of these semi-glutides, instead of just like working, to get yourself in shape.
I think that if you look at all the peptides, RFK is probably anti-GLP-1. That's a fair assessment. But looking at them in their totality, I think you may find that they're a longevity drug because of all the additional potential benefits. They've been used in smoking cessation and cocaine cessation. They seem to help to mitigate people drinking alcohol. There seems to be a profound benefit potentially on mitigating heart disease, mitigating Alzheimer's. So although they might be a shortcut to fat loss, and it's essential to consume protein and continue resistance training while you're on these GLP-1s to be able to preserve muscle, you don't necessarily want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Where there are people who misuse them and end up in a worse metabolic condition, there is a way to be able to apply these peptides to produce profound, desirable, beneficial, and sustainable outcomes.
How do peptides work? I mean, it's kind of cool how did scientists discover these different type of peptides? Now, I found out, or I know that like the BPC 157 is found in the stomach.
Well, it's actually secreted in the gut.
So in the gut. So, we had an episode that we talked about gut health.
Everything seems to go back to the gut.
Yeah, it goes to the gut. But the thing is that you can actually, most of these have to be injected, but I know BPC can actually be taken in a pill form because it is something that's in your gut that enzymes don't destroy it.
For sure.
From your stomach.
So BPC is an interesting peptide because it is bioavailable or functional both orally and as an injectable. Typically, peptides are injected subcutaneously, but BPC is one that can be used in a multitude of ways, at least anecdotally, and this is not definitive or been through a double-blind placebo-controlled trial or anything, but at least anecdotally, the orals tends to give just a gut health benefit, whereas the injectable has more of a benefit on wound healing, tissue repair, as well as gut health. So if you're looking for all of them, typically the injectable is preferable, but the oral definitely has a benefit for all kinds of gut-related issues, and not just leaky gut, but things like Crohn's disease. There's been a lot of potential options where doctors are utilizing these peptide therapies where they would have used a pharmaceutical and getting a better outcome.
So when you use, say, a BPC 157, I heard it could be used two different ways, like you said, orally, but even when it's injected, it can be taken systemically, or it can be taken into the area where you're injured.
Absolutely, and the reality of site-specific injections is usually those are in a joint. That's typically where the BPC is utilized, and most of those are injected by a practitioner under medical supervision, guided by ultrasound and done in a clinical environment. So site-specific is not necessarily something you can self-administer. Injected into your shoulder isn't necessarily going to help your shoulder joint, but there is a profound, typically systemic benefit that has been seen anecdotally from patients who use it. So a subcutaneous injection will normally provide many patients with, at least they self-report, increased range of motion, mobility, strength is recovered, faster injury recovery. And when you combine that BPC with things like TB500, which is the thymosin beta-4, or a growth hormone secretagogue, that combination of IGF-1, TB500, and BPC is just a trifecta when it comes to wound healing and recovery.
So also the IGF-1 should be taken alongside with TB500 and BPC 157.
There is a certain degree of assumption that clinicians have come up with that the BPC 157 seems to upregulate the IGF-1 receptor, helping it to exacerbate the benefit on the connective tissue. This is not definitive, but it certainly seems to be practically applied in producing those types of results. So whether or not that's the mechanism of action or that's the exact pharmacokinetics of the peptide, we don't know. But in the real world, people are using those three peptides and getting profound injury recovery.
Now, what's the difference? Because TB500 and BPC 157 both, do they have the same effect, or they work through different pathways because they both bring down inflammation or they help with healing? What's the difference between the two, and why should you take them together, and why are they synergistic together?
Well, they certainly have a synergistic effect, and the thing is that with peptides, especially because they're not pharmaceuticals, we don't have all the mechanisms, we don't have all of the different information. When it comes to tissue repair, BPC seems to be the superior alternative. When it comes to reducing inflammation, the TB500 seems to be more effective, and that combination seems to help injury recovery, and then when you add something like a secretagogue that increases growth hormone, which in the liver, back to the liver again as well, converts growth hormone into IGF-1, that IGF-1 tends to interact well with the BPC to be able to increase the tendon and joint healing, also speed recovery after surgeries. That combination, a lot of patients have seen just unbelievable, profound benefits, and doctors can't explain how quickly they've recovered from injury or how fast they've progressed through their subsequent therapy.
Now, peptides, like we talked about, are a different arrangement of amino acids. They're short chain amino acids. Why are they considered a drug? They're just basically amino acids.
Well, I mean, every drug is some sort of a molecular combination of different components. So anything in the United States, anything that's made in a pharmacy, especially anything that's made as an injectable, is considered a drug. The FDA has very specific guidelines. The state boards of pharmacy regulate that as well. So anything that's made in a compounding pharmacy that's made as an injectable or compounded into a capsule or a sublingual or anything like that, de facto becomes a drug. So from a regulation standpoint, they're drugs. We can argue whether or not a peptide is a drug, but practically and legally, they're considered drugs in the United States.
Okay, so they are considered drugs. I mean, are they like in the same category as steroids?
Well, an anabolic steroid is a derivative of testosterone, and it's a whole different type of animal. Like a peptide is a very generic term because peptides can do all kinds of things. Peptides can have an impact on healing, they can have an impact on the pituitary to increase growth hormone, they can impact the pigmentation of your skin, they can impact the fine lines or wrinkles or help with collagen production. There's peptides to help with cognitive function, there's peptides to help with telomeres to potentially extend your longevity, on and on and on. There's a peptide for everything, whereas most anabolic steroids are either primarily anabolic or primarily androgenic, depending on what the desired result or outcome is.
And what are the side effects? I mean, if you take long-term, steroids, they could shut down your own system, where your endocrine system shuts down. What's the side effects of taking long-term, peptides?
Well, peptides haven't been around long enough to have a ton of information on them. Like one of the original GHRH drugs, Sermorelin, which was FDA approved in the 90s, that's now very popular, is probably the most commonly prescribed growth hormone secretagogue, which we'll talk about in another episode. It's been around a long time. But it was always used as a diagnostic tool and never actually as a supplement. But there's a big difference between a peptide that signals your body to produce something versus an anabolic steroid that shuts down a natural production. Like when you supplement with an anabolic steroid, you shut down natural testosterone production. So the signal, it's called a negative feedback loop. So what happens is your body sees it has an excess of either testosterone or an anabolic steroid, and it shuts down your natural testosterone production. So you have that negative feedback and it shuts off your normal function, whereas a peptide, like a secretagogue, will stimulate the pituitary and the hypothalamus to increase the production of growth hormone. So what you're doing is you're enhancing or increasing the natural production of what your body can make of growth hormone anyway, and then the natural negative feedback loop still exists, so you won't overproduce to the point where you can actually create a problem, whereas you see issues with growth hormone, especially in the world of bodybuilding, where you have GH gut, or you have carpal tunnel, or you have things like edema and swelling and things like that. Typically with the secretagogues that stimulate a natural process, they tend to be much safer anecdotally by virtue of the fact that they're signaling the body to enhance its own natural processes.
Now, you talked earlier about, I guess elongating the telomeres. I don't know if people out there know what telomeres are. It's supposed to be the DNA strands, the ends of the DNA strands. And what's said is that those things start to fray, and that's what causes the aging process.
Well, every time there's a cellular division, the telomere tends to shorten. Well, your body is in a constant state of cellular division. So that's what happens is cells divide, and that's just a normal process that happens. And every time the cell divides, the telomere tends to shorten. And this is true of most cells in the body. And science doesn't have it pinned down exactly that telomeres or telomerase is the key to anti-aging, but there certainly are drugs that seem to mitigate the shortening of the telomere or increasing of the production of telomerase, which is what prevents the shortening or even can elongate the telomere. So there's a lot of cool stuff that's happening, but there are peptides that seem to increase telomerase and also seem to either decrease the speed at which the telomere shortens or even potentially elongate it. and then potentially increase lifespan. Now, this is all, there's a lot of theoretical in that.
Yeah.
But there certainly are peptides that have an impact on that.
So give it to me. Which ones are they? That's going to do this.
The epitalin is a peptide that actually
What's it called?
Epitalin.
Epitalin.
Has an impact. It looks like it has an impact on telomerase, which will have an impact potentially on the length of the telomeres. Whether it slows the shortening or it extends them, and whether or not that matters, the jury's still kind of out. There's lots of other drugs that also impact that as well. There's a lot of studies into metformin, which is a typical type 2 diabetes drug that's not very expensive, that may also potentially delay the shortening or extend telomeres as well. So it's a neat area of science. It's a key component of anti-aging medicine, and it's interesting to see that peptides are potentially a huge part of life extension.
Another one that I've taken, felt great on it, was MOTS-C. Talk about MOTS-C.
Well, and MOTS-C is another one that's, the mechanism isn't completely understood, but it's a metabolic drug. It does help to kind of turn up your metabolic engine.
Give you energy.
It seems to help burn fat. It seems to help metabolize fat for energy, which is the hardest place to pull from. Like, the body will typically go to muscle glucose in the beginning to pull for energy, and then as it runs out of that, it'll go after muscle tissue, and fat stores are the hardest to get to. Anybody who's ever tried to lose fat understands that. MOTS-C tends to help the body lean in the direction of utilizing to cause fat oxidation, to be able to use it as a fuel source, which provides energy and metabolizes fat simultaneously. So, and that is a mechanism that is at least believed to be the function of how it works, again, anecdotally, without any specific, understanding exactly how the pharmacokinetics of that peptide work.
So how many peptides are there? How many peptides has scientists discovered or come up with?
I mean, there's literally hundreds that are available. There are 40 or 50 that have been made available. And the peptide market is unique in that the peptide market has both the doctor prescribed, pharmacy compounded peptides that are on the regular prescription market, which are specialty made mostly by anti-aging clinics, longevity doctors, things like that. Then there's also an entire underground market for peptides where they're sold for research purposes only. And that's where you'll find a broad array of peptides, including all the stuff the FDA restricts. And bodybuilders, I think, have dipped into that realm and are using a lot of these research-grade peptides to be able to augment their existing nutrition, supplementation, and anabolic steroid and testosterone intake.
I mean, it's the new frontier. Like, when I competed, there was no such thing as peptides, and it's kind of cool. I mean, probably the first peptide was GH. GH is considered a peptide, right? Because it's an array of amino acids, but it's not short. It's, 141 amino acids?
I think it's 191 chain.
191, sorry.
But growth hormone was a huge deal when it came out of the bodybuilding
yeah.
arena. Like, I'm sure that was a game changer.
Wow. When I was competing, I don't know if you know this is going back into the mid 80s, into late 80s. The first GH came from rhesus monkey cadavers.
Well, they were doing, the initial GH was actually cadaver driven, absolutely.
Well, it came from rhesus monkey, then it came from human cadavers. Yep. And then they were able to synthesize it. And it was a big deal because they were able to do the 191, chain amino acids. So I know that GH is a peptide. People don't know that insulin is a peptide.
Well, certainly, and I think that growth hormone and insulin are both key of the upper echelons of bodybuilding. Insulin is probably the most dangerous drug, along with diuretics, that bodybuilders can mess with. Yeah. And my personal recommendation would be to never touch insulin under any circumstance, for any reason, at any level, in any kind of competition at all, just because of all the potential negative effects. When there's so many other great ways to be able to enhance the anabolic activity in your
Andrew,
body.
I watched the whole process. We were the guinea pigs, and I watched bodybuilders go from, using, the first GHs to the insulin, how they perfected it in going in today's bodybuilding, where I can't even tell you. We'll have another episode on how these guys are using, SARMs, peptides, GH, all these different other, drugs. But let's move on to, the peptides. There are other good, really great peptides. We talked about one, you and I were talking earlier, that contains a copper, and that helps with, I guess, the collagen in the skin, or it helps with hair growth.
For sure. The GHK copper is another peptide that actually the FDA doesn't have an issue with currently when it comes to it being used topically. It seems to have a positive benefit on fine lines and wrinkles. It seems to potentially enhance collagen production. There was a lot of discussion about it potentially having anabolic properties as an injectable, but that really hasn't been pursued because there's so many other options between anabolic steroids and peptides and SARMs and like all the things you just mentioned, that there's not really a gap in muscle building. So it hasn't really, I haven't seen much information about its anabolic effect, but it's certainly as a cosmetic, as an augment to people who are looking to mitigate aging, especially when it comes to like hair loss, when it comes to fine lines and wrinkles and enhancing collagen production. It's certainly promising in that arena.
And what about brain? There's a lot of different peptides to help, cognitive thinking, memory, brain fog. What about all those?
Well, there's a lot of peptides out there. You and I were just talking about one, which is cerebrolysin.
Yeah,
which
I'm hearing it all. It's really underground right now, but it is coming more to light.
It certainly is, and it's a porcine-derived product. Like there's a handful, like there
Pig
are.
brain.
Well, for sure. So it sounds scary or odd or unique, and it may prohibit certain people from using it by virtue of where it's derived from. But the Big Pharma also has porcine-derived drugs. There's actually a thyroid medicine called Armour Thyroid that is actually derived from desiccated porcine thyroid. So It's like, and it's a very widely used, safe and effective drug. I take Armour Thyroid, have for 12 years. It has a profound metabolic enhancing effect as well as optimizing your normal thyroid function, which is a whole nother episode in and of itself. But there is the potential of that peptide to be able to mitigate Alzheimer's, to mitigate cognitive decline, to enhance cognitive function. A lot of it's in its infancy right now, but that peptide specifically has a ton of promise. Like the ability to biohack and to be able to really influence all these different functions in your body with peptides, it's an amazing time to be in this industry.
Oh my God. And like we were talking about earlier, I think that there's going to be more open doors, with someone like a Robert Kennedy that's going to use alternative types of medicines, where it's going to help people, or what we want to call preventive medicines. I believe medicine today is more for if you have some type of it gets rid of symptoms. So if you're sick, here's a drug that you take to get rid of the symptom. But does it really cure you? No. It seems like these drugs are used to take care of symptoms, but not really to cure the person. And I think with a lot of the peptides, they may be the answer to help with curing a lot of diseases.
Well, and that's most certainly true. I mean, one of the things, like I said, I work for a testosterone optimization peptide fat loss company. We do a lot of those types of things. And the goal is to be able to help preserve lean muscle, reduce body fat, get cholesterol in line, get blood pressure in line, get blood sugar under control, do all the things to mitigate aging. Also, at the same time, it helps with body composition. When you do those things, you don't need a lot of pharmaceuticals, and you can use, we practically apply through our nationwide physician group nutraceuticals in conjunction with peptides, in conjunction with pharmaceuticals where appropriate. But there's a lot of opportunities for preventative medicine. There's a lot of opportunities to stave off these issues. And there's a ton of studies that have come out that have talked about maintaining lean muscle mass. And if you maintain lean muscle mass, it reduces all-cause mortality. And that means it reduces the likelihood of cardiac arrest, it reduces the likelihood of Alzheimer's, the likelihood of a stroke. All these different issues can be mitigated by maintaining lean muscle, and that also drives your metabolism, which allows you to be able to stay lean and stay strong and stay mobile and active well into life. So muscle is the key to longevity.
Again, we always talk about, having muscle. It's one of the most important things. People would be like, oh, I have to do like cardio or run a marathon, but it's really weight training, gaining muscle, eating properly.
Well, and there was a study that was just done recently that has been kind of controversial, and it talked about the best way to reduce body fat, and they compared lifting weights only to lifting weights and cardio only, and lifting weights only was the most optimal way to reduce body fat. Now it was just in front of lifting weights and cardio, so that was a close second, and cardio was well behind that because you don't preserve muscle when you do just cardio. So the concept of resistance training mixed with peptides, proper nutrition, proper supplementation, maintaining proper organ function, like we've talked about in the past, talking about things like gut health, talking about things like liver health, those are all imperatives, but lean skeletal muscle is the anti-aging solution, and keeping all those other systems healthy to help facilitate that is the key to longevity.
I mean, what else do we, there's so many great peptides. What else can we talk about on, the benefits of peptides?
Well, I mean, there's about a peptide for everything. I mean, we touched on it earlier, but there's another peptide called melanotan, and there's now melanotan 2, which seems to be more popular, not really utilized in a lot of peptide clinics, but it actually tans your skin. So it'll, this may be
I usually
something.
don't have that problem because I'm Italian. I get a good tan. You know, I get
Yeah,
good
I'm a
color.
little more fair skinned than you. So
Yeah.
for a guy like me that may have some value, it's the melanotan is an interesting drug.
Yeah.
It's or an interesting peptide.
So
I
it
should
works
say.
on the melatonin, obviously.
Well, it has a profound effect on tanning, but it also has a sexual benefit, which is sometimes unexpected, is it can kind of cause spontaneous erections, which is good or bad depending on the circumstance.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for sexual health peptides, there's definitely other options like PT141, which is another one that's out there.
Oh, there's another one for that.
Absolutely.
Too.
Well, it's actually FDA approved for female sexual hypofunction, but it's
so it
used
helps
by both men and
females.
women. Well, it works for both genders. Mixed results, everybody kind of reacts to it differently, but that's a drug. The PT141 is widely prescribed in the United States by practitioners in the anti-aging and sexual health and wellness
Very
arena.
cool. So there's a peptide for everything that you
There
want.
really is. There really is. And the safety profile on these, like, look, everyone will say that there's no free lunch, but there are millions of Americans injecting and ingesting peptides every day. And if they were dangerous, it would be all over the news.
I mean, like I said, I've been using peptides for the last couple of years. I felt great benefits from the GH releasers, energy from the MOTS-C, pain reduction from, the Wolverine, TB500 with BPC 157. I'm really interested in do the ones more for the brain, because,
who doesn't want to maintain cognitive function or cognitive enhancement potentially?
Yeah.
So there may be way beyond just preservation of your cognitive function. What if you could enhance it?
Like that movie, what was that movie?
Limitless.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? So you have an opportunity like and these are all like, this is all conjecture, and a lot of this stuff is like, the medicine is learning through practically applied, peptide utilization with patients. Also, bodybuilders have been cutting edge forever. Bodybuilders figured out aromatase inhibitors before medicine did. Medicine used it for breast cancer. Bodybuilders use it to mitigate gyno. So it's like the bodybuilding community are some of the best scientists from practically applied utilization of drugs that there are in the world. So a lot of innovation has come from bodybuilding.
What do we call it? We call it bro science.
Well,
there's so much bro science that it had happened back in the 80s, maybe 70s, mostly in the 80s. I think a lot of changes from the Arnold era into my era into the 90s, that this bro science just took off.
Well, the bro science, the problem is that the bro science a lot of times is more accurate than the doc science. And there's a lot of bro scientists who have a better understanding of pharmacokinetics or the mechanism of actions of drugs or how to mitigate side effects or how these things actually work or what the dosages are. I've met a lot more bro scientists that have real useful real world knowledge than a lot of clinicians that I've run across.
Because they run it on themselves.
Well, they're their own guinea pig,
Yeah, their own guinea pig.
I mean, how much of an impact was Nolvadex around when you first started as a bodybuilder?
Yes.
Well, the utilization of Nolvadex, which was originally used for post-breast cancer treatment patients,
we used it.
allowed for bodybuilders to start raising their dose of testosterone substantially because you could mitigate the gynecomastia. So then you had drugs that were aromatase inhibitors that came along, like Arimidex or Femara or...
We didn't have Arimidex back then, but we did have Nolvadex.
And those are used in anti-aging medicine now to mitigate estrogen, to be able to supplement testosterone without having the aromatase activity convert, testosterone into estradiol. So it's like, and that didn't come from a clinician who figured it out. That came from a bro science guy who said, hey, look at the mechanism of action here. We can use this and not get gyno and not end up with high estradiol levels that you get when you take just test and tamoxifen, which is Nolvadex.
And it was all like in the gym, hey, use this, hey, use that. And it was just amazing.
Well, I got interested in anti-aging medicine, but my original learning was from Dan Duchesne's Underground Steroid Handbook.
God.
I don't know if you remember Dan Duchesne.
Of course I know who Dan
He's like
Duchesne
the
is.
guy who was the...
he did so much for the stuff that he did on himself.
Oh, absolutely.
Just crazy stuff that he did himself. If you don't know who Dan Duchesne is, look him up. What was the book that he did? The Underground Steroid Handbook.
He was the original. He was the OG guy that came out.
I know. It's one of the first books that I read. He was after the fact of what I've done, like in bodybuilding, but there's a lot of information
it's great
that he put on there that it was taboo to talk about it. It was funny, the whole thing. Like I said, we'll go into steroids, but that they don't work. That these things don't enhance athletic ability. They would be right on the label, which is
well, the
false.
government came out and said that. I mean, the reason that they were regulated as a controlled substance and all of the different propaganda surrounding anabolic steroids, they tell you that they don't work, but then anybody who's ever taken them will clearly tell you that they do. They wouldn't be banned by the world doping agencies if they didn't work. If they didn't work, they wouldn't be regulated as controlled substances. And the fact that they are is bizarre anyway because of the fact they don't cause much harm if utilized properly.
So I have a good question. Are the peptides banned in Olympic sports?
Well, I think most of the doping agencies have a prohibition on almost everything. Even the most liberal of organizations, which say like the UFC would probably be one of the more liberal organizations when it comes to that. They've had a big mix-up in their anti-doping program lately, but I know that, I've even heard Joe Rogan talk about on his podcast that the UFC has a prohibition on BPC, and he's like, that doesn't make any sense. They also have a prohibition on things like cerebrolysine and other drugs like that. And he said, well, why wouldn't you want to have a peptide where a guy can recover from injuries from a fight who's doing a very physically damaging job to his own body, or where he's taking consistent head trauma, because cerebrolysine and some of the other peptides that are out there that are cognitive peptides may actually have a cognitive protective benefit to prevent things like CTE or TBI or things like that. So, he's a very outspoken proponent of peptides as well.
Alzheimer's, I've just read a lot of research on that, helping dementia, Alzheimer's. But if you're healthy, it's like you said, it can make you limitless.
Well, absolutely. And the thing is that muscle, again, is the solution to almost everything. Muscle drives metabolism. Muscle drives posture. Muscle drives your core. Muscle drives everything. So muscle is so important when it comes to things like controlling blood sugar. Like if you keep blood sugar under control and insulin resistance in check, they now refer to Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes. At least the whole anti-aging world does. The general medicine still calls it Alzheimer's, but they understand that blood sugar and insulin resistance are huge issues, and skeletal muscle helps to control that. So there are many other ways to do that. The GLP-1s and microdosing may have some profound value. There's a lot of cool stuff that's going to be coming out about that.
What about that? You talked about GLP-1s or semaglutides microdosed.
For sure. So there's 4 major GLP-1s that are out there right now, and that's the retatrutide, the semaglutide, the tirzepatide, and the liraglutide. They're all different versions, but basically semaglutide is a GLP, then you have a dual action drug, which is a tirzepatide, and then there's a triple action drug, which is a retatrutide. The liraglutide's a daily injection. It's kind of a pain in the ass, and most people don't use it. I believe it's only approved for type 2 diabetes, but the other 3 seem to have a real profound effect, not only on blood sugar regulation, insulin sensitivity, but definitely body composition. And in the arena in which I work, we find patients who use GLP-1 drugs, but in conjunction with high protein diets and resistance training, they're able to mitigate the loss of skeletal muscle mostly, not completely, but mostly. And especially when combined with testosterone, which has an anabolic effect, the body composition changes are profound. And when they come off the GLP-1s, it's also sustainable. It's really it's a game changer when it comes to everything. Also, there's been a ton of anecdotal studies or anecdotal information that's come out from clinicians talking about GLP-1s helping patients stop using cocaine, stop using alcohol.
That's interesting.
Smoking cessation. Like there may be a positive effect on Alzheimer's because of the fact that it has an insulin resistance and blood sugar related component to that degradation of your cognitive function. So there may be GLP-1s are likely to become one arrow in the quiver of an arsenal for clinicians to be able to deal with anti-aging. It's just they have so many positive effects. They get such a bad rap, but when used improperly, if you don't prioritize protein and you don't utilize resistance training, you can lose equal amounts of muscle, equal amounts of fat, and then if you gain that weight back and it's primarily fat, you're in a disastrous metabolic situation, and that's where GLP-1s aren't utilized properly, and it's by general practitioners and regular physicians who don't understand the value of skeletal muscle.
I know it's the biggest craze in Hollywood, like all the actors are using it. There's so many actors that had weight issues and now they're slim because they're all using semaglutides to help them lose weight. So it is something that's just, it became so big for what it is today. It's just become a multi-billion-dollar industry that not many years ago didn't even exist.
Absolutely, yeah. You have Ozempic's been around, I think, about 8 years now since it's been approved.
Nothing.
But Ozempic was originally approved for type 2 diabetes to help regulate blood sugar. And what they found is that typically people who have high blood sugar also normally, not always, but sometimes have high body weight and high body fat concentrations. And they noticed that these patients' blood sugar and A1C were correcting, but at the same time, they were losing substantial amounts of weight. It's kind of like when Viagra was studied. It was originally used as a heart drug, but they were finding 80-year-old men who were on this drug who started getting erections, and they abandoned the heart drug study completely and went in the direction of sexual enhancement and erectile dysfunction. So it's like, you've also found the same thing that happened.
Mistakes in medical research that ended up doing something else.
Well, you remember the famous painter Bob Ross, where he'd screw something up and he'd call it a happy accident? I think medicine has happy accidents too. You got a heart drug that turns into making an 80-year-old guy get an erection. You're like, let's sell erection drugs. Enough with the heart drug. Now there is a heart drug version of sildenafil, which is there's a Viagra for that. But that's why immediately these drugs shifted, and these companies moved from not just a type 2 diabetes drug, but to a weight loss drug. And really what people should focus on is not weight loss, but body composition and fat loss, and that's what helps to create a sustainable metabolism.
That's the difference, where you should take into account training properly, eating properly, and not just use a get quick rich. I'm not rich, but get quick body fat off your body drug. They do work, but like you said, not used properly, you can lose muscle. If you're not eating properly, I mean, anyone who's eating properly can definitely sustain muscle, lose body fat. I have clients that I help, online clients, and I get them to take semaglutides when I see they have a really difficult, like insulin resistant body, that give them, get them on low carbs, and I go up and down with their carbs, and they still don't lose weight. You get them on taking one of these semaglutides, they start to lose weight. Once they get to a certain body fat that they're losing, then I take, they get off of it, and now their body is like working again.
Well, absolutely, and it also has a profound effect on people who don't have adequate self-control. People who can't control their nutritional intake. Well, it does a couple of things. One thing, it slows down gut motility. So it has an effect on ghrelin, which is with other drugs like we've talked about, it can increase hunger. Well, if you decrease it, it can reduce hunger, and it slows gastric emptying. So what happens is, when you take those drugs, food stays in the gut longer, again to the gut. The gut seems to be the central focus of a lot of things we talk about. But when you slow down gastric emptying, you feel fuller longer. And those drugs also then send a signal to the brain that to create more leptin. And leptin tells the body it's been satiated, it's been fed enough. So you have a signal saying you're full, and you feel full simultaneously. So for your patients or your clients who are unable to, they don't have the discipline to diet, or they'll gorge at the end of the day, semaglutide, or tirzepatide or retatrutide, those drugs have a profound effect on regulating how much they actually intake by mitigating hunger. It's really a profound, you have to then really fixate on things like macronutrients, prioritizing protein, and absolutely incorporating resistance training. That's how all of our physicians do it, and that's how you end up with sustainable results and a better metabolic situation at the end of the program.
I mean, Andrew, we can go on and on and on, but we're getting to the end of the show. I think this was a great episode. I really appreciate all the knowledge on peptides.
Absolutely.
And we definitely have to do this again with some of the other peptides that are out there, so that the audience can hear some of the other stuff that you could talk about with when it comes to peptides.
Well, it was a pleasure to be here, Rich. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was great to having you on the show. So again, another great episode. Please like the video and subscribe.